Saudi Arabia, OPEC, BRICS. So the Saudi, we know the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has recently decided to cut down oil production, which will raise oil prices, which is something Joe Biden and his party did not want, because that will result in more inflation in the US, and that could hamper the Democrats' bid to win the midterm elections, right? Uh, so Joe Biden had asked, demanded, ordered the Saudis to not cut down on the oil production, but the Saudis have gone ahead with this. The Saudis are the biggest of the OPEC countries, right? The major oil exporter in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So this is going to be bad for the US, and the US, I believe, is now releasing some of its oil reserves in order to keep oil prices below a certain level, which obviously will displease the US to a great deal and make them very, very angry and upset with Mohammed bin Salman, the king, or the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. Not the king, but the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. Now, the other news that has emerged is that Saudi Arabia has asked, apparently, to join BRICS. Let's take a look at that. So it is something that Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, has disclosed, that Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. This is what the South African president Cyril Ramaphosa has disclosed. Now, what does this mean? What is BRICS? I think we all know what BRICS is if you live in India. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are the 5 nations that make up the BRICS group of countries. Out of these countries, the 3 nations that really matter are India, China, and Russia. These are the 3 major nations, the 3 great powers, apart from the US. The US is a superpower, and these 3 nations are the 3 great powers in the world today. India is now a member of the League of Great Powers. And you have Brazil and South Africa as well in this grouping. Recently, I believe this June itself, Iran has applied to join BRICS. Yes. And now we have the news that South Africa also wishes to join BRICS. So you could have a BRICS plus or a BRICS plus plus emerging, maybe a new world order emerging, the so-called global South. You have BRICS, or you could have BRICS plus plus if Iran is inducted and Saudi Arabia is also inducted. Saudi Arabia was created by the British Empire. Understand this. The nation of Saudi Arabia was created by the British Empire. And the purpose of doing this was to safeguard Britain's oil and geopolitical interests in the Middle East region. After 1956, when the center of gravity or center of power was transferred from London to Washington, the US essentially became the major patron of the Saudis. The major Saudi Arabia essentially was once a vassal state of the UK, and it is now a vassal state of the US. But now it is going very strongly against the US demands or directives, right? So this could be this looks like a very dangerous game that the Saudis are playing, especially Mohammed bin Salman. It's dangerous to go starkly and very strongly against US. Against the United States in this manner, in a manner that's directly detrimental to US energy security. I think it's a very dangerous game that Mohammed bin Salman is playing. But let's say Saudi Arabia joins BRICS or applies, then this could totally change the global world order. You could we have, on the one hand, we have the US-led vassal states, right? Let's take a look at the US vassal states in case you want to see what they look like. 1 second. Let me put that on the screen. So this is a recent tweet by Lloyd J. Austin III, the Secretary of Defense of the US, in which he said that this is what unity looks like. This was on October 12. Today, I gathered defense ministers of nearly 50 countries to discuss the latest battlefield developments in Ukraine and to work together on how we can continue to support Ukraine and blah, 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 blah. So he gathered, he's the great shepherd who gathered his sheep together. The defense ministers of nearly 50 countries. These countries, whichever they are the major vassal states of the US. These would include whatever the usual suspects and so on. So on the one hand, you have a bunch of American vassal states along with the US, which includes the Five Eyes nations: the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. That's the Five Eyes nations. Then you have NATO. Then you have the European Union and various other vassal states of the US, which are spread around the globe, including major nations like Japan, South Korea, and so on and so forth, so on and so forth. So on the one hand, you have this grouping of countries, the US and its flock, its vassals. On the other hand, you have the so-called global South. They call it the global South. Earlier, they used to call it the third world, right? So in this, the major grouping, the most powerful grouping of nations is the BRICS grouping, which could eventually become soon, possibly BRICS plus plus. Then you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, which includes China, India, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan also, Russia, Tajikistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, so on and so forth. In which obviously the top three nations, the most powerful nations, are India, China, India, and Russia, and also a group of other countries. In which Pakistan serves as the eyes and ears, possibly of the US to some extent, or maybe of China. So you have the so-called global South, which is now emerging as a separate block of countries, separate group of countries, which could include Iran also. And you have the so-called global north, or the first world, which is the US and its vassal states. You are seeing this bifurcation of the world order in progress right now as we speak. It's happening very rapidly. So in case what the president of South Africa, what he said is true, that could represent a very major development, an almost unthinkable development. The Saudis would apply, or would want to join a, a grouping of nations that essentially represents everything that the US doesn't like, which essentially represents a different world order from the US led so-called rules based or whims based world order. So yes, so interesting development. Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS. If that is true, it's very interesting, very significant. And obviously, what they are doing with OPEC is very detrimental, essentially, to the U.S. Foreign policy, U.S. national interest, and the U.S. will not be happy about this. And I don't even know what repercussions the Saudis could suffer as a consequence of this. It's never a good idea, if you are a US client state, if you are a US vassal state, to go against the diktat of Uncle Sam. We have seen what happened to people like Saddam Hussein, who were once the darling of the US, right? So it's very dangerous, and I hope Mr. Mohammed bin Salman knows what he is doing. India and Saudi Arabia share a very good, very warm, very positive, and mutually beneficial relationship, which is all thanks to Prime Minister Modi. Before Prime Minister Modi, there was no. Before Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, was elected to power in 2014, India-Saudi Arabia relations were nowhere as strong and as dynamic and as positive as they are now, right? So I hope Mohammed bin Salman knows what he's doing. I hope that the India-Saudi Arabia relationship continues to get stronger in a mutually beneficial way. But yes, very interesting developments, and I would like to see what the Americans do about this. There could clearly, I mean, right now, Ukraine is the linchpin of the global of the US geopolitics, US global strategy. Venezuela, which the Americans destroyed, essentially, the Americans destroyed the Venezuelan economy in the last 10 years. Now Venezuela is again in the good books of the US because they have a lot of oil and the Americans want oil. Saudi Arabia is not playing by the US rules, so maybe now Venezuela could again, benefit from American largesse, and maybe Saudi Arabia could face some consequences of what's happening right now. So yes, this is something we're going to keep an eye on. I'm going to keep an eye on. I'm going to keep on talking about this in the forthcoming episodes of the Indian Interest. But yeah, as of now, for today, this is where we stop about Saudi Arabia and BRICS and the SCO and all that.